So my name is Soten, and I'm a senior student here, and I see lots of friends and familiar faces, and lots of faces that aren't so familiar that one day perhaps will be friends. And usually, those of you who have heard any of my Dharma talks know that I'm usually tilting towards the side of pretty analytical. But that's not really where my heart is these days. It's been a strange 2023 so far, a bit challenging. During the month of January, 4 people I'm close to passed away. The first, I love that I'm mentioning her in a Zendo, is my Auntie Muriel, who was my godmother. Yes, British Jews had godparents, and my parents were British, and Auntie Muriel was British. And we grew up in Hartford, although the connection comes from England. And my 2 very first earliest clear memories that are vivid to me, one, I'm clearly an infant, and I'm crawling around on the kitchen floor, and I'm underneath the kitchen table, and I can see my mother's feet and Auntie Muriel's feet. And somehow I know they're having an afternoon cup of tea. And then the next one is I'm 4, and it's an afternoon. The room is dark because the blinds are drawn, but there's light coming in through the Venetian blinds. And on the TV's on, and they're kind of quietly crying, and I hear the clip-clop of horses, and it was Kennedy's funeral. So they shared that together. Then when in 72, Auntie Muriel moved with her family to Israel, to Jerusalem, and when Prince Charles and Diana got married, my mother and her had to have a phone hookup, which in those days was extremely expensive to watch the entire thing together because they were such good friends. She passed away at 93. A week before she passed away, she had a little tiny stroke, couldn't speak or understand for a little while. They rushed her to the hospital, dissolved the stroke. She recovered completely, but they called me up and said, "We think you should speak to her soon if you want to, because she's starting to do what your mother did. She's talking to people on the other side." Including my mom, of course. And the Shabbos before she passed away, she had one last game of Scrabble. She won with a 46-point word slam, and then was done. And that was it, which is good. Mission accomplished. Then a week goes by, and a friend of Mark and I, a friend of Mark's and mine, I don't know English, David I, who's probably, he liked to say he was the only person who could claim to have been in the military. He was in the army and in a touring company of a Broadway show, in his case, Cats. And in his maturity, he became a wonderful poet and a teacher of poetry, and was perfectly healthy and younger than us by about 5 years, and then just had a massive stroke. No warning, no illness prior, just, you know. And now there are people across the United States who are alive because he donated his heart and kidney, liver, etc. Then the mom of a close friend, many of you in the Zendo may know, Miyoko's mother passed away in January after a long elder care saga, which many of us are familiar. And then the week after that, succumbing to a long illness, my closest friend from medical school passed away. not unexpected, though unexpected for when it happened precisely. Mark Sorensen. So, and at the same time, post-session, I had vowed, I took a vow to start coming back to the Zendo now that it had opened. I sort of, about COVID, I lost the habit. And even though the Zendo had reopened, it was hard to get back that habit. But after session, I realized, no, I needed some in-person sitting. And so the first week it was open, I came back, and then all this other stuff happened. And one of the wonderful things about coming back is being present with my friends in a way I haven't been in so long, particularly coat room conversations before or after sitting. And that's finally brings me to our study text, Layman P'ang, because while you can, there are two comparators for me, and many people have already said this. Number one, there's the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is the other great layperson document in Buddhism, and Roshi made that my study text for the Anga when I was Shusa, so it's near and dear to me, and really became a model for, okay, what does this mean to be a layperson? And Layman P'ang is recognized as sort of being another Vimalakirti. But his text is very different. In a more Chinese Zen Chan style, with each little story could be a koan in our koan study easily. I mean, they're all little koans. And so they all take that form. And so when I signed up for the Dharma talk, I was flipping through and thinking, oh, which of these will I go all analytical on? And then was struck by, I'm sure what has struck everybody, is that out of the 50 some odd stories in the book, more than 40 of them are not typical koans of teacher-student. They're friend to friend. And I thought that's worth talking about. So you go through the stories and they're grouped friend by friend. And many of them are just, they start talking. But many of them begin with a sentence of a little bit of a friend activity. The layman visits them, they visit P'ang. He interrupts their meditation, or he interrupts their chores with something. They share lunch or dinner, or they have a cup of tea. And sometimes they just sit and chat, and it becomes this thing. Sometimes they go out for a walk. Sometimes they just bump into each other on the road unexpectedly. Hello, P'ang. Hello, Pai Ling. And then a little thing happens. And there's a flavor in them. You can tell these are real friendships filled with real affection. They're not interchanges created for the purpose of teaching. That comes next. But where they start is these friendships. And it makes me think about how funny Zen friendships are. First, there's, we sit here in silence, facing the wall often. We recognize each other's knees perhaps better than we recognize faces. And if we know the names, if we remember the names, and is it the English name or the Dharma name? Did that person get a Dharma name? Or what, and what do we do? Who are we outside of here? And you'd think that that's shallow, that these are shallow sorts of things, but they're not, because my experience of this is that when we're sitting here, there's such an intimacy that grows, silent minute after minute, period after period, etc., including the occasional stolen smiles where you're not supposed to be looking at each other, but we did. And then you can bump into someone on the street God help me if it's with like my husband, and then I have to introduce him, and I'm like, well, I know this person really well, but what's your name? You know, how many of us have had this experience? But we know each other on some really profound way. And even the names are sort of extraneous details, what you do for a living, what your home situation is. In the Zen friendships, this is where it starts. And this is what underlies it. And you may or may not layer that with other non-Zen experiences, although once you have that as a base, is there any such thing as a non-Zen experience? And it's kind of amazing. No one warned me about that in Zen practice. I can't think of it being described except now in the Layman P'ang stories. Yeah, so, and another aspect to this is those people who I have spent time with, both in the Zendo and outside, whether it's having breakfast or a cup of tea, or traveling back and forth to a retreat, a session, or attending to people in the hospital or at home or in hospice, or all, you know, all these varieties of things. Of course, trying to be analytical, I started thinking about how many categories of these I could make, and then I was just like, okay, stop with that. But there are a few varieties that I thought are worth highlighting. One is I've spoken about this in prior Dharma talks, and with people one-on-one, my relationship with Kaku. May he rest in peace. When I met Kaku Sensei, he was Bob Gunn, and then went through several Dharma names, which was very confusing to me. Kaizen, Kaku. There was a third one in there somewhere. I don't know. Jigen. Yeah. And but the thing is that we would see each other at Zendo, lots of cloakroom conversations, but I don't drive. He drove, and so back and forth to Wisdom House, the most common thing. He would drive me up, and we would drive home together. And while I didn't become a rabbi by like inches, and he was a minister. And so we had this whole backstory to explore of our devotional practices in our other religion, and the meaning of community service in those, and why choose that as a profession, why not for him, what it means to come into Zen, you know, for me, similar. And one of the things that was really, so that was all Zen commentary between us. And one of the things that was, well, I'll come back to that actually. So Zen friendship. But then there's my friendship with Sybil Mioshin Taylor, Sib, who we got together for breakfast, for lunch, cup of tea, usually in one of the diners at 9th and 23rd Street, or maybe further towards along 23rd Street East. That was our most common spot. I remember us gossiping about the Zendo, but I don't remember us having religious talks, spiritual talks, the way Kaku and I would. We talked about writing. We talked about our families. We talked about having cancer, thinking we have cancer, getting misdiagnosed with cancer, getting diagnosed with cancer. We had a lot of that between the two of us. And but all of that was how you deal with those life and death issues. The conversations I had with her about those things, I have had those conversations with other people. I came of age in the AIDS era. But we were Zen students together, and there was something else, something richer and more intimate and easy. We could just speak about it easily without shame or hesitation, because we spent so many hours here together, I think. And then there's just the ways in which you experience things with other students who are friends that also enrich the experience of practice. And I come back to Ryoko with it. She gave me permission to tell this story. I'm not sure if I had to ask Roshi's permission, but I didn't. But so we were, she and I were in Tukju Kai together, and we had a rather obstreperous, raucous little group. Maybe every group is like that, but ours was, you know, we challenged her some moments. I could tell you stories, cloakroom. But after, we all got together for one last time, now finally wearing the rakusus that we had sewed. And Roshi said to us, so, you know, now that you're wearing your rakusus, take it and look at it. The stitch work, the pattern, how it holds together, that's your mind as it is now. And Ryoko and I looked at ours and looked at each other's and hers, there wasn't a single right angle anywhere in the thing. And mine, every single thing was perfectly aligned, but the stitch work was so tight, you could see the tension. And it was like, okay, somewhere between us, there's a healthy Zen student. But, and that moment was one of the most important teachings I received in Zen, to be sort of aware of what's the state of your mind and be okay with the state of your mind or the mind of your neighbor, but then see how you work with that and how that being aware and mindful of that becomes this thing. So she was my teacher in that moment. And maybe I was her teacher too, in a reciprocal sort of way. And then there's the funny experience of teachers, students, friends who start as students and then go on to become teachers and receive Dharma transmission. And there's something extra and kind of wonderful when I'm in Dokusan with a teacher or Daisan, and it's someone I've been friends with for years, never laughed so hard as Dokusan with someone who's a pal. But the depth I feel like I often get to with them because there's such a depth of experience between us. And again, lack of shame, intimacy, etc. And that comes out of friendship. Yeah, we'll skip that. Always worth cutting down a little bit. What this makes me think of, what came to mind when I started thinking about talking about this stuff, is a favorite experience I have every session when in the morning, people are coming in to the long parallel rows and start bowing to each other across the midline. And then to the people on either side, and everyone bowing back. And I like to get there, if I can, on the early side, because it's almost as though everyone is stitching themselves together. It's sort of a giant rakusu to me, as everyone weaves with their bowing across the room, up and down the lines. And I love that, watching that experience. And thinking about that, it made me think that, oh, the metaphor works here too, maybe. We spend a lot of time talking about lineage and chanting lineages, which is sort of this vertical line from before down. But, and is that the warp? Which goes up and down, the warp. And the woof goes horizontal. And the woof is the Zen friendships. It's not just the vertical lineage. If it were, there's no flexibility there, there's no strength, there's no stability, there's no resilience. It's the weave that comes back and forth between how each of us connect with each of our Dharma siblings, our Dharma friends. And And that's the weave that becomes the third treasure, the Sangha. And wow, this talk's nailing me. So I thought I'd finish with just sort of inviting all of you online and offline. Oh, and just one other thing. The amazing thing is how it doesn't matter online or offline. That I have people I've known for years only online, and they're some of my closest friends. And a vivid experience to me was session over the summer. I was sort of in the annex at Wisdom House, and when the Jukai group, most of whom were from online and had never been with us in person, suddenly swept in towards the end of my stay there. And I was sitting there, and I was clearly in a room full of friends. But I knew that these were just people who had seen each other online for the last 2-3 years. So it doesn't matter online, in person. For me, this is really important. For some people, the online is sufficient or important because of what that allows. We all find our way, skillful means. So I would just invite you to look around the screen or look around the room and think about the friendships that you have here and the friendships that you might develop in the years to come, online or off. Appreciate that. Isn't it just nice to be practicing here together?